The dismissal, the Kalari Confederation had mapped 17,000 star systems across 3 galactic arms. Their sleek silver vessels moved through space with the confidence of a species that had never encountered a challenge they couldn't overcome through superior technology and intellect. For 8 centuries, they had catalogued civilizations, ranking them by technological advancement, military capability, and potential threat level. Admiral Dexara stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of the flagship Eternal Dominion. Her 4 arms moved gracefully as she manipulated the 3-dimensional map, zooming in on a small yellow star in a relatively quiet sector of the galaxy. The system had been flagged by their automated scouts as containing a potentially habitable world with signs of primitive civilization. Another backwater system, she muttered, her translator converting her clicking consonants into standard galactic common. What's the designation? Captain Zolmar, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the blue-white lights, consulted his datapad. System designation, Solthry Admiral, single inhabited planet, locally called Earth. Initial scans indicate a bipedal, carbon-based species in early technological development. They've barely achieved nuclear fission and primitive spaceflight. Dr. Vexton, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, approached with her characteristic shuffle. Her tentacled head swayed as she reviewed the preliminary data. The inhabitants call themselves humans, Admiral. Standard carbon-based biology. Average lifespan of approximately 80 local years. No significant technological threats detected. They still use chemical propulsion for their limited space vehicles. Admiral Dexara's mandibles clicked in amusement. Another species that thinks they're alone in the universe. How wonderfully naive. What's their threat assessment? Minimal, Captain Zolmar replied, without hesitation. They're divided into numerous warring factions on their single world. Their most advanced weapons are crude nuclear devices. They haven't even established a permanent presence on their own moon. I'd classify them as barely past the Stone Age in galactic terms. The Admiral's attention was already shifting to other matters when Lieutenant Creever's voice cut through the bridge chatter. The young atmospheric analyst's voice carried an unusual tension that made everyone pause. Admiral, we're receiving some unusual readings from the planetary atmospheric scan. Dr. Vexen's tentacles twitched with interest. Define unusual, Lieutenant. Lieutenant. Creever's bioluminescent patches flickered nervously. The atmospheric composition is ... concerning. Nitrogen at 78%, but oxygen at 21%. That's an extremely high oxygen concentration for a stable biosphere. The bridge fell silent. Captain Zolmar's antennae twitched. That can't be correct. Run the scan again. I've run it 4 times, Captain. The readings are consistent, but there's more. Lieutenant Creever's patches were now pulsing rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among her species. The atmospheric pressure at sea level is 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's nearly twice what most civilized species consider safe. Dr. Vexton moved closer to the atmospheric display, her tentacles dancing over the controls. Show me the full environmental readout. The holographic display shifted, showing a detailed breakdown of Earth's atmospheric and environmental conditions. What they saw made even the Admiral's confident demeanor falter. Gravitational force 9.8 meters per second squared. Lieutenant Creever read. That's 40% stronger than Keelary standard. Average surface temperature ranges from -42 plus 50 degrees Celsius. The planet experiences regular electrical storms with discharges exceeding 100 million volts. Captain Zomar's voice was barely a whisper. "And the humans live in this." "They don't just live in it," Dr. Vexton said, her voice filled with growing amazement and horror. "According to the bioscan data, they thrive in it. Their bodies have adapted to process that oxygen concentration through an iron-based blood system. The high gravity has made their bones and muscles incredibly dense." Admiral Vexera stared at the swirling blue and white planet on the display. "You're telling me these primitive humans live on a world that would kill most galactic species?" "Within minutes, it gets worse," Admiral Lieutenant Creever continued. "The planet's surface is 70% covered by vast bodies of salt water. The salt concentration would be toxic to most species, but humans regularly immerse themselves in it for recreation. The land masses are covered with massive weather systems that include frozen precipitation, violent wind patterns, and temperature fluctuations that would require environmental suits for most civilized species." Dr. Vexton was now frantically pulling up additional data. "The biological scans are showing something extraordinary. These humans don't just survive in this environment. They've evolved to become stronger because of it. Their muscular system responds to stress by increasing mass and power. Their skeletal structure becomes denser under pressure." "Show me their daily activities," Admiral Vexera commanded. The display shifted to show surveillance footage of human activities. The crew watched in stunned silence as humans ran long distances without mechanical assistance, lifted objects many times their own weight, and engaged in combat sports that involved deliberate physical trauma. "Look at this," Dr. Vexton said, highlighting a section of the scan. "They have a stress response system that floods their bodies with performance-enhancing chemicals. Their reaction times become faster, their strength increases, and their pain tolerance skyrockets. They call it adrenaline." Captain Zolmar's voice was shaking. "They become more dangerous when threatened." "Significantly more dangerous," Dr. Vexton confirmed. "But that's not all. They've developed complex social structures around conflict and survival. They engage in ritualized combat for entertainment. They intentionally expose themselves to extreme conditions to become stronger. They've developed hundreds of different fighting systems and weapon techniques." The Admiral turned to Lieutenant Creever. "What about their technology? You said they were primitive. Their technology is crude by our standards, but it's specifically designed for their hostile environment. Their vehicles are built to withstand impacts that would destroy most civilian craft. Their weapons are designed to function in extreme weather conditions. Their architecture is built to survive natural disasters that would level most galactic settlements." Dr. Vexton pulled up another display showing human military exercises. "Admiral, look at this. They regularly train in conditions that would require full environmental protection for our forces. Desert warfare in 50-degree heat, Arctic operations in -30-degree cold, underwater combat, high-altitude operations where the atmospheric pressure is insufficient for most species to survive." The bridge crew watched in horrified fascination as humans parachuted from aircraft, scaled vertical rock faces without mechanical assistance, and navigated through obstacle courses that would challenge their most advanced military equipment. "How many of these humans are there?" Admiral Vexera asked quietly. "Approximately 8 billion, Admiral," Captain Zolmar replied, "spread across all the habitable regions of their planet. They've adapted to every environment on their world, from frozen polar regions to scorching deserts to dense jungles filled with predatory life forms." Predatory life forms. Dr. Vexton's tentacles were now moving frantically over the controls. "Admiral, their planet is filled with creatures that would be classified as extremely dangerous by galactic standards. Large predators with teeth and claws, venomous creatures, massive herbivores that could trample most known species. And the humans share their world with all of these creatures. How do they protect themselves? They don't just protect themselves, Admiral. They've domesticated many of these creatures. They've turned the smaller predators into companions. They've learned to ride and control the large herbivores. They've even learned to hunt the apex predators for food and materials. The Admiral stared at the display showing a human wrestling with a creature that looked like it could tear through Kilari armor with its bare claws. They hunt their planet's apex predators. Admiral, Lieutenant Creever said, her voice barely above a whisper. According to the ecological data, humans are their planet's apex predators. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of the ship's systems. Admiral Deck looked around at her crew, seeing her own dawning realization reflected in their faces. Captain Zolmar, she said finally, what was our original invasion timeline for this system? 6 months, Admiral. We were planning to send a single battle group to establish orbital dominance, then deploy ground forces for pacification. Admiral Dexera looked back at the blue world spinning peacefully in the display. Cancel those plans. We need to conduct a full strategic reassessment. But Admiral, they're still technologically primitive. A single Kellery battle group could what, Captain? Fight 8 billion apex predators who've evolved to become stronger under stress. In an environment that would kill most of our forces without environmental suits. Creatures who've turned their entire world into a training ground for violence and survival. The Admiral's forearms moved to gesture at the display. We've been looking at this all wrong. We saw primitive technology and assumed weakness. But what if their technology is primitive because they don't need advanced technology to survive? What if they've become so personally dangerous that they've never needed to develop the defensive technologies that most species require? Dr. Vexstein's tentacles had stopped moving. Admiral, there's one more thing. The humans have recently begun developing space-based weapon systems, crude by our standards, but if they apply the same principles they use for terrestrial warfare, show me. The display shifted to show images of human space programs, missile defense systems, and satellite networks. They're already weaponizing their orbital space. These primitive rockets they use, their repurposed weapons of war, their space stations, are designed to be defensible. They're not exploring space for science or expansion, Admiral. They're preparing for war. Admiral Vexera stood in contemplation for several long minutes. Finally, she turned to her communications officer. Send a priority message to High Command. Classification: Galactic Threat Assessment. Subject: Solthry System, Humans. Recommendation: immediate reclassification from minimal threat to... She paused, looking once more at the images of humans thriving in their hostile world. To Category 5 Apex Predator Species. Recommend complete avoidance until further assessment. As the message was transmitted across the galaxy, Admiral Vexera couldn't shake the feeling that the Kalari Confederation had just discovered something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be a dangerous species in the galaxy. The revelation 3 days had passed since the initial atmospheric scan, and the Kellery fleet remained at the edge of the Sol system. Admiral Vexera had ordered continuous deep-range observations while waiting for High Command's response to her threat assessment. What they discovered during those 3 days would reshape galactic civilization's understanding of evolutionary perfection. Dr. Vexton hadn't left her laboratory since the first scan. Her tentacles moved with increasing agitation as she processed the continuous stream of data from their enhanced surveillance equipment. The more she learned about humans, the more she realized that their initial assessment had been catastrophically insufficient. "Admiral," she called through the communication system, "you need to see this immediately." Admiral Vexera arrived to find Dr. Vexton surrounded by holographic displays showing human biological data, environmental readings, and behavioral analyses. The xenobiologist's bioluminescent patches were pulsing in patterns that indicated extreme scientific excitement, mixed with profound concern. "What have you found, Doctor?" "Admiral, we've been approaching this entirely wrong. We've been thinking of humans as a species that survived in a hostile environment. But they're not survivors. They're the environment's ultimate product. They didn't adapt to their world. Their world created them." Dr. Vexton manipulated the display to show a detailed breakdown of human physiology. "Look at this cardiovascular system. Their heart is a 4-chambered muscular pump that can increase its output by 400% under stress. Their blood carries oxygen through iron-based hemoglobin that's far more efficient than most galactic species. But here's the remarkable part. When they exercise or face danger, their body doesn't just work harder, it rebuilds itself to be stronger." Explain. "Their muscular system responds to stress by increasing fiber density. Their bones become denser under impact. Their nervous system develops faster reflexes through repeated challenges. Admiral, they have a biological system that turns trauma into strength. Every challenge they face makes them more dangerous." Captain Zolmar entered the laboratory, his antennae twitching with agitation. "Admiral, we've intercepted some of their communication signals. You need to hear this." The display shifted to show intercepted human communications. The universal translator worked to convert human languages into galactic common, but the content was what made the Kalari officers freeze. "This is from what they call extreme sports," Captain Zolmar explained. "Watch this." The screen showed a human throwing himself from an aircraft at high altitude, free-falling through the atmosphere before deploying a fabric parachute at the last possible moment. The human's biological readings during the fall showed elevated heart rate, increased adrenaline production, and what appeared to be intense pleasure responses. "They do this for fun?" Admiral Vexera asked. "It gets worse," Dr. Vexton said, switching to another feed. "This is called mountain climbing. They scale vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet, often without safety equipment, and this is deep-sea diving. They descend to crushing depths in their toxic oceans, wearing minimal protection." The displays continued to show humans engaging in activities that would be classified as extremely dangerous by galactic standards. They jumped from cliffs into water, raced vehicles at lethal speeds, and fought each other in organized combat sports. "Admiral," Lieutenant Creever called from her station, "I'm detecting unusual atmospheric disturbances over several human population centers." "What kind of disturbances?" "Electrical storms, Admiral, massive ones. Lightning strikes are occurring at a rate of several hundred per minute across multiple regions. The humans are continuing their normal activities." Dr. Vexton pulled up the meteorological data. These storms would require immediate shelter and emergency protocols for most civilized species. The electrical discharges alone would disrupt most technology and pose lethal risks to organic life. And the humans, they're flying aircraft through them. Some are engaging in recreational activities outdoors. A few are actually standing in elevated areas taking pictures of the lightning strikes. Admiral Dexter stared at the display in disbelief. They're treating a lethal electrical storm as entertainment. Asterisk, Admiral. There's more, Dr. Vexton continued. I've been analyzing their military structures. They don't just train soldiers. They deliberately expose their military personnel to every possible form of environmental and physical stress. They have training programs designed to push their personnel to the absolute limits of survival. The display showed human military exercises, soldiers crawling through mud while live ammunition was fired overhead, personnel surviving in frozen environments with minimal equipment, and combat training that involved actual physical violence between participants. But here's what's truly remarkable, Dr. Vexton said. Their civilian population voluntarily engages in many of these same activities. They have competitions to see who can endure the most physical stress. They have events where they run extreme distances through hostile terrain. They have contests where they lift weights that would crush most species. Captain Zolmar was studying the tactical implications. Admiral, I've been analyzing their warfare patterns. They don't just fight to win, they fight to completely dominate their environment. They've developed weapons and strategies for every possible combat scenario. Desert warfare, Arctic combat, jungle fighting, urban warfare, mountain operations, underwater combat, even combat in the vacuum of space. Space combat. They've already begun developing orbital weapons platforms. Their space program isn't just for exploration, it's for establishing military dominance in their local space. They're preparing for interstellar warfare, Admiral, and they don't even know other species exist yet. Dr. Vexton highlighted another section of data. Admiral, I've discovered something else. Their stress response system doesn't just make them stronger, it makes them more intelligent. Under pressure, their brains release chemicals that increase focus, enhance memory, and accelerate decision-making. They literally become smarter when threatened. The Admiral studied the data with growing alarm. You're telling me that threatening a human makes them stronger, faster, smarter, and more dangerous? Yes, Admiral, and there's more. They have something called adrenaline addiction. Some humans actively seek out dangerous situations because they become dependent on the chemical responses that danger produces. They've turned risk-taking into a recreational activity. Lieutenant Creever's voice interrupted their discussion. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from High Command. The communication came through with the authority of the Supreme Council itself. Admiral Dexter read the message with growing concern. High Command has reviewed our assessment. They're dispatching a full research fleet to study the humans more thoroughly. They want to understand how a species can evolve to be so perfectly adapted for violence and survival. Admiral, Dr. Vexton said quietly, there's something else. I've been monitoring their global communications. They're not just surviving on their world, they're actively trying to make it more challenging. They're exploring the most dangerous regions of their planet, diving to the deepest parts of their oceans, climbing the highest mountains, and venturing into regions where their own atmosphere is too thin to sustain life. Why would they do that? Because they're not satisfied with just surviving, Admiral. They want to conquer everything. Their entire species is driven by an impulse to dominate their environment completely. They don't just want to live on their world, they want to master it. Captain Zolmar was reviewing tactical data when his communication system activated. Admiral, we've intercepted what appears to be a human scientific discussion. They're talking about terraforming other worlds. Terraforming. They want to transform other planets to be more like their own. They're discussing technologies to create high oxygen atmospheres, increase gravitational fields, and introduce their own biological systems to other worlds. Admiral Dexera felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. They want to turn other worlds into death worlds like their own. Admiral, Dr. Vexton said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think they understand that their world is a death world. I think they believe their environmental conditions are normal. They might try to terraform worlds to be more like Earth because they think that's what life should be like. The implications hit the command crew simultaneously. A species that considered high oxygen atmospheres, extreme weather, dangerous predators, and constant environmental stress to be normal living conditions would inevitably try to recreate those conditions wherever they went. Admiral, Captain Zolmar said, High Command needs to know about this immediately. We're not just dealing with a dangerous species. We're dealing with a species that could unintentionally transform the galaxy into an environment that only they could survive. Admiral Dexera looked once more at the blue world spinning peacefully in the display. From this distance, Earth looked beautiful and serene. But now she understood that they were looking at the galaxy's most perfect predator breeding ground, inhabited by 8 billion apex predators who thought their lethal environment was normal. Send an addendum to High Command, she ordered. Classification change. Humans are not just Category 5 apex predators. They're galactic environmental threats. Recommendation: maintain absolute distance until we can develop protective measures. For contact, as the message was transmitted, Admiral Vexera realized that the Kellery Confederation had just discovered that the galaxy's most dangerous species was also its most naive. The humans had no idea that they were living in conditions that would be considered impossible for most galactic life. They had no idea that they had evolved into the perfect interstellar predators. And most terrifying of all, they had no idea that they were not alone in the universe. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen finished her atmospheric research for the day, noting the perfectly normal oxygen levels in her report. Marcus Rodriguez successfully completed his free climb of El Capitan already, planning his next mountain challenge. General Patricia Hayes reviewed military training protocols, always looking for ways to make her soldiers more resilient and capable. None of them knew that they had just been classified as the galaxy's most feared species by a civilization that had conquered 17,000 star systems. The humans went about their daily lives, breathing their corrosive atmosphere, thriving in their high-gravity environment, and constantly pushing themselves to become stronger, faster, and more capable. They remained blissfully unaware that they were the galaxy's perfect predators, living on a world that served as the ultimate training ground for interstellar warfare. And in the depths of space, the Kellery fleet retreated to a safe distance, waiting for instructions on how to deal with a species that had accidentally evolved into everything the galaxy feared most. The greatest threat to galactic civilization was a species that didn't even know they were dangerous.